Well, good morning. Welcome to Tuesday's class. PSW staff, clients, and friends joining us. Okay, yesterday, Howard Blake, The Snowman. Results already look good. You can finally use some lyrics if you want. Not just any lyrics, but if you wanted to use lyrics, because there's lyrics in this song, Walking in the Air. Lovely song by Howard Blake, English composer. So I thought, maybe we'll look at an English composer today. We're going to vary it up today, this week rather. So I wanted to look at maybe one of the most famous English composers that we've talked about, that we looked at. So today we're going to revisit the genius, Benjamin Britten. Benjamin Britten was an English composer, pianist, and conductor, one of the biggest figures of 20th century English music, British music, with a huge range of music. We won't get to cover all of them. I mean, we're talking about 16 operas. His operas are performed more than any other composer born in the 20th century, so that shows you how his output and how his operas are performed all the time. And they were considered some of the best operas, English operas, since Henry Purcell in the 17th century. We looked at Henry Purcell. So we're going to be talking kind of about British classical music, but it's under the umbrella of good music, right? And his other music ranges from orchestral to choral music. We're going to listen to some beautiful choral music, particularly with using the children's choir and the boys' choir, chamber and instrumental, as well as some film music later. That is music that he wrote for children. It's just so special and wonderful. So we'll have a lot of fun talking about Benjamin Britten. So you want to go over to the the English North Sea. Okay, so he's born in Lowestoft, Suffolk, which is part of the English North Sea coast town. And he's born in 1913, dies in 1976. Where's my timeline? Let's get this timeline up here. So he's friends with Shostakovich, okay? So they're the two leading figures. And he's very influenced by Mahler. Mahler's a little bit before. He does some work with Colin McPhee, the first minimalist composer. We'll take a look at that. So he starts writing in around 1919 is when he's starting to write. But we'll look at his early life. A little bit later, but in 1913, the huge musically, the year he's born is the year that Stravinsky's Rite of Spring premieres in Paris, and this causes a huge riot. Literally, I mean, we could do a class on just the night of the performance, which was in Paris on May 29th, and Stravinsky premiered the ballet, The Rite of Spring, and it was a huge riot because the audience didn't understand the dissonance in the music, the tribal music going on, even the dancers. Nijinsky's choreography was very scandalous, but it changed the world of classical music after that forever. People didn't know that music could be like this. I mean, particularly classical music. He was breaking so many rules. So Britten's born this year, so it goes to show you he's going to be born into a time when music is changing. Music changes probably forever after this night. Because Stravinsky's doing things that were not allowed in the concert hall, something like that. The other huge thing that happens, which is related to the arts, is Marcel Proust, my favorite writer, comes out with Swann's Way, published the first book of his Remembrance of Things Past. Swann's Way is published in 1913. So Britten's born in a year where very exciting artistic things are happening. So when he's 3 months old, he gets pneumonia. He nearly dies, and the illness left him with a bad heart the rest of his life. So, but born into a middle-class family, and went to public schools. His mom taught him music mostly. His dad was a dentist, and she gave him his first lessons in piano and notation, and starts writing music when he's 5 years old. Starts piano lessons and starts playing the viola. And interestingly enough, his dad didn't really allow technology in the household. So they said that he's one of the last composers to be brought up just with live music. So there's no gramophone, no radio in the house. So when you think of how hard is that to, when you listen to a piece, think of how well you must have listened to it, because when you hear live music and there's no recording of it afterwards, you really have to pay attention. So, and the fact that he said that he had mastered between the ages of 13 and 16, he knew every note of Beethoven and Brahms. So obviously he had the sheet music so he could play it, but his musical memory must have been incredible. But yeah, live music, you go to a concert, you pay attention, because that's the only time you're gonna hear it. There's no recording, right after of it. And he goes on to study at the Royal College of Music in London, and studies with Frank Bridge, who's a huge influence on him, and he wrote some beautiful music for Frank Bridge. He also discovers Debussy and Ravel, and he learns kind of orchestration from their scores. We did a whole class on Debussy and Ravel, the very beautiful French Impressionism music that came out of those guys. And then starts writing in the 1920s. So we've looked at music, particularly jazz and early jazz, swing music. So that's the music that's going on in the 20s. This is when Duke and Count Basie are getting their sounds in America. But in English and in England, and in Europe in general, classical music, what's going on is that some of them are going into jazz. Britten does not go into jazz. His music doesn't sound like jazz at all. But other composers writing at the time of Britten, Poulenc we looked at, he's going to use some jazz elements in his classical music. Villalobos is writing. He's going to be using his Brazilian music, right? Prokofiev is writing music. Now he's going to be doing a little bit with Britten's doing, even though he's Russian, opera, large-scale works. Eric Satie is writing. He's going to be using a little bit of jazz, but the solo piano pieces are being written, the beautiful pieces. And Ravel is writing music. So those are the classical composers that are writing at that time. But then America is having the Roaring '20s and having a ball with jazz. Age 23, Britten meets Peter Pears, who's probably the most important person in his life. They were not only partners professionally, but also personally for about 40 until Britten died. He was his. The two of them really created a great legacy together. They were collaborators, and Pears was a singer that Britten would use in a lot of his operas. In 45, when the war ends, he starts writing an opera with his partner Peter Pears. The funny thing is, it's not that funny, but he gets the idea of the opera in Escondido, which is in San Diego. So he's hanging out in 1941. He's hanging out over here in our neck of the woods, which is kind of cool. When he goes back to Britain, he encounters this Balinese gamelan music, which we've talked about with who? With Colin McPhee. Remember, Colin McPhee was one of the first minimalist composers doing repetitive minimalism gamelan music in the 30s, like way early, way before John Adams, and Steve Reich. So the two met and collaborated a lot together. In fact, this is them playing gamelan music, a live recording of them. So that's kind of minimalism music. Britten doesn't do that. I mean, he's strictly a classical composer, late romantic, like we talked about. He's not going into different genres of music. He's not pushing that kind of envelope. opera is mainly his thing. Writing for the voice is mainly his thing, and for many voices. So, amazing career. Dies of congestive heart failure in 1976. So, just 12 days after his 63rd birthday. So doesn't live too long of a life. His personality was very youthful. He had a very child's-like view of the world. He was very sensitive and very hypercritical of criticism, and was kind of well known to drop friends that criticized his music, because I think he was just so sensitive that he couldn't take it. But he was also very hypercritical of his own work as well. One of the most famous pieces he did was in 1946, the Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra. This is played in schools with a narrator. This was huge because it introduces people to the orchestra, and it's a really lovely, fun piece. Personally, what I love are his music for boys' choir and children's choir. There's something about hearing a pure children's choir singing music that's so wonderful. His cuckoo song is just lovely. And probably my favorite opera of his is Midsummer Night's Dream. This came out in 1960, and the opening is just so magical. So all the fairies in the opera are sung by a children's choir, mostly a boys' choir, and it just puts you into this magical realm of Britten's imagination, and how playful he was as a composer.
make no stay, meet me all by break of day.
Just wanted to give you a taste of Benjamin Britten, one of my favorite composers, one of the biggest composers of the 20th century, and definitely the fourth B of Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, and Britten. Such an iconic, and his music is just so beautiful. So I hope you enjoyed Benjamin Britten, one of my favorites, and that Midsummer Night's Dream is just gorgeous. Just the boys' choir in that, and what a genius. So, some similarities. English music. We looked at Walking in the Air is a English pop song, even though it was kind of under the realm of orchestral classical pop. Britten's not so much like that. He's more in the traditional, although he's alive in the 20th century. He's more in the classical tradition. So I just wanted to see if we could juxtapose kind of, he wouldn't have written Walking in the Air. I wonder if he could have, he was more of a serious classical composer in the English style. But Howard Blake was in the English style too, but this was more of a pop song. It would be interesting to hear if the director was like, hey, Benjamin Britten, can you write us a song? Could you write a pop song? Could Benjamin Britten do that? I don't know. It's just something that I was thinking about. So, but tomorrow we're going to do something completely different. And so have a great rest of the day. See you tomorrow for Wednesday's class. Okay, bye.